He agreed to be her husband for one weekend. He never planned to fall in love with her. If you've ever watched someone walk away and realize too late that you should have fought harder to keep them, this story is for you. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Part 1. The cafe was called Birch and Grounds, and it smelled like dark roast and something close to peace. Mason Reed had stumbled into it by accident 14 months ago. A Tuesday, in October, his truck parked illegally on West 23rd because the alternator light had flickered twice and he'd pulled over before the whole thing decided to die on him. He'd needed somewhere warm to kill time while he waited for his buddy Danny to answer the phone, and the hand-lettered sign in the window had looked like something his daughter would draw. Uneven letters. A little smudged. Genuine. He'd walked in expecting nothing. He kept coming back because of the coffee, he told himself. The dark roast was serious, the kind that tasted like someone actually cared what went into it. The chairs weren't matching. The playlist was unpredictable. One morning it was old Coltrane, the next it was nothing at all, just the sound of the espresso machine and street noise bleeding through the front glass. There was nothing slick about the place, nothing designed to impress you. It just was what it was. He kept coming back because of her too, though he would not have said so out loud. Her name was Victoria Sterling, and she had the kind of face that was hard to read. Not cold, just careful. She was usually behind the counter when Mason came in on weekday mornings, though she dressed like someone who should have been heading into a glass office tower on Park Avenue, not frothing milk and counting change. Fitted blazers, hair pulled back, eyes that tracked everything in the room with an efficiency that felt like a different language than the soft way she'd slide a mug across the counter and say, "The usual?" He always nodded. He'd been coming in long enough that she knew. Black coffee, 1 sugar, and if he looked like it had been a rough morning, a slice of banana bread he never asked for and was always charged half price. She'd never told him her name. He'd found out from her receipt, Sterling V, at the bottom, and he hadn't asked about the rest of it. There was an unspoken rhythm to their mornings, a comfortable distance that didn't need filling with conversation. He showed up. She made the coffee. Sometimes they talked about nothing, the weather, a burst pipe on 24th that had the block torn open for 2 weeks, a story she'd read in the paper about a warehouse fire in Red Hook. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, and that was fine too. Mason wasn't looking for anything. That was important to understand about him because it shaped everything that came after. He was 32 years old, and the primary fact of his life was his daughter, Lily, who was 6, and who had her mother's eyes and his grandmother's stubbornness, and a laugh that could embarrass him in public because it was just that loud and honest. Lily's mother, Carla, had left when Lily was 18 months old, not in a dramatic way, not in a cruel way, just gradually and then completely, the way a season changes before you realize it. She was in Portland now. She called on birthdays. That was the whole of it. Mason worked 60, sometimes 70 hours a week as an electrician. He had a small apartment in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, 2 bedrooms, one of which was entirely consumed by Lily's artwork and stuffed animals and the construction paper animals she'd started making after her teacher showed the class origami. He split childcare with his neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, a retired school teacher who watched Lily on the mornings he started before 7 and who accepted payment in the form of Mason fixing things around her apartment, which he did without complaint because she was kind and reliable, and he didn't know what he'd do without her. His life was full and exhausting and thin in certain places, the way lives get when you're doing too much alone. But it was his, and he'd built it deliberately, and he wasn't someone who spent much time grieving the things he didn't have. So when he walked into Birch and Grounds on that Thursday morning in March and found Victoria Sterling standing at the counter with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking, staring at the middle distance with an expression that looked like someone had just told her the worst possible news, he almost didn't say anything. It wasn't his business. But she looked like that coffee was the only thing keeping her upright, and he'd been there before. In a specific kind of way, he'd been there before. "You okay?" he said, settling onto the stool across from her. Victoria blinked. The careful expression came back like a curtain being drawn. "Fine," she said. "The usual?" "Sure." He set his work bag down, watched her move through the motions, grinding, tamping, the familiar sigh of the espresso machine. "You don't look fine," Nobody looks fine at 7 in the morning. You usually look fine at 7 in the morning. She glanced at him sideways. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, but close to one. You've been paying attention. I've been coming here for over a year, hard not to. She pushed the coffee across to him, didn't answer right away. He watched her weigh something, decide against it, then decide again. My ex is getting married, she said, in 3 weeks. Ah. He's marrying someone named Delphine Ashworth. Her family owns half of Connecticut. Victoria picked up her mug, finally took a sip of her coffee, set it back down. I've been invited to the wedding, which is either incredibly gracious or incredibly deliberate, and I haven't decided which. Mason turned his coffee cup in his hands. Are you going? I haven't decided that either. Would it help? Going? She looked at him like that was a strange thing to ask. Help what? Whatever you're trying to get over. The cafe was empty at this hour, except for a woman in the back corner typing on a laptop. The espresso machine ticked as it cooled. Outside, a truck rolled by and the windows rattled gently in their frames. His name is Brandon Hayes, Victoria said. We were together for 3 years. He ended things 8 months ago, very politely. She paused, choosing cleanly. He told me he'd met someone who was on the same level as him socially, and that he'd been pretending not to care about that for our entire relationship, and that he was sorry, but there it was. She said it without much emotion, which Mason suspected meant there was a lot of it underneath. He's attending the wedding with Delphine, obviously. Half the people I know will be there. His family will be there. And you want to show up and not look like you've been destroyed. She paused. I wasn't destroyed. No, but he thought you would be, didn't he? Something in her jaw tightened. That was answer enough. Mason drank his coffee. Let the silence sit for a moment. So don't go. Why put yourself through it? Because the people at that wedding are investors, partners. 2 of them are currently in talks with my company, and a no-show looks like, she stopped herself, because I'm not going to hide. Okay? He nodded slowly. That makes sense. Another silence. This one was different. He could feel her working up to something. He'd been around enough people who were bracing themselves to ask for a favor to recognize the shape of it. I need someone to come with me, Victoria said. Not a date. That's too complicated, There'd be assumptions. I'd owe someone an explanation afterward. I need something more specific than a date. Mason set his mug down. What's more specific than a date? Victoria's eyes met his. Direct, a little careful, a little like someone about to step off a ledge. A husband. The words sat between them like something dropped. Mason looked at her for a long moment. Come again. Not a real one, obviously. She said it quickly, but not nervously, like she'd thought this through and arrived at a conclusion that was logical, even if the logic was crooked. Brandon spent 3 years telling me, in one way or another, that I wasn't quite enough. Not the right background, not the right circles, not someone he'd ultimately choose. And now he's marrying someone who is all of those things. And when I walk into that wedding, her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. I don't want to walk in as someone still putting herself back together. I want to walk in as someone who is happy, Mason said. She looked at him. Yes. Not just unbothered, actually happy. Yes. He leaned back on the stool, studied the counter, the ceramic tiles, the little cracks in the grout, scratched the back of his neck. I'm a 32-year-old electrician from Brooklyn, he said. I don't own a suit that costs more than $200. I don't care about that. I don't know anything about whatever circles these people move in. That's not... You don't need to. She sounded like she was arguing with herself as much as with him. I just need someone who won't make me feel small. Someone who... She stopped, tried again. Someone who treats me like I'm worth treating well. That landed somewhere in Mason's chest that he hadn't expected. He looked at her, really looked at her. The careful composure, the coffee going cold in her hands, the way she was holding her shoulders like she was bracing for him to say no. When is it? He said. The wedding was in the Hamptons. Of course it was in the Hamptons. Mason told Lily that he had to work on a Saturday, which wasn't entirely untrue. He had, in the week since saying yes to Victoria, been doing a different kind of work. He'd met her at the cafe 3 more times in preparation, and they'd constructed a story together the way you'd lay electrical wire through a wall, carefully, with the future in mind, making sure everything connected to something real. They'd met at the cafe. That part was easy. They'd been together for 2 years. They'd gotten married quietly. Courthouse, no fuss, which suited both their personalities. They lived separately for now because of the logistics of his work and her travel schedule. They were working on that. These were the bones of it. Everything else they'd have to improvise. "My mother is going to ask how you proposed," Victoria told him on the second meeting. They were sitting at the corner table this time, both with coffee, a legal pad between them that she'd abandoned after 5 minutes because writing it all down felt too clinical. "What do you want me to say?" "Something that sounds like you, not something that sounds scripted." He thought about it. "I could say I asked you in here." "In the cafe?" "You were closing up. I'd come back after my shift. It was late. You were doing inventory. I asked you if you wanted to get dinner, and you said yes. And at dinner I told you I'd been in love with you since October." He paused. "Or whenever. The month doesn't matter." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "That's..." She cleared her throat. "That would work? And the proposal specifically?" 6 months later. "I could say you asked on a Tuesday. Nothing special. Just in the kitchen, before work. Said you didn't want to wait for the right moment because you were tired of there being a right moment for everything." Something in her expression, just for a second, went somewhere he couldn't follow. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That works." The third meeting, she told him about Brandon. Not the version she'd given him at the counter, shut, the tight, economical version, but the longer one. 3 years. She'd believed it was heading somewhere. She was 30 at the time he ended it, and she'd been thinking about the future in concrete terms, not abstract ones, and he'd pulled the ground out from under her by being so calm and so certain and so... "Sorry, Victoria, but this is just how it is." Like she was a phase he'd outgrown, like 3 years had been an experiment. "He used to do this thing," she said, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table. "Whenever I talked about my work, my actual work, the company, what I was building, he'd listen for a few minutes and then redirect the conversation. Not rudely, just effortlessly. Like what I was saying was a charming tango, he had to wait out before getting back to something more important." Mason said nothing. He was listening. "I started summarizing," she said, "giving him the headline instead of the story, because I could tell the story wore him out." She looked up. "I haven't told anyone that before." "Why not?" "Because it sounds like I was letting it happen." "You were being considerate. That's different." She looked at him like she wasn't entirely sure if she believed that. He thought maybe she'd had a long time to decide it was her fault, and that was going to take more than one conversation to undo. Victoria arrived at Mason's apartment the Saturday morning of the wedding at 8 o'clock, which was what they'd agreed, but he still felt the small jolt of opening the door to find her standing in his hallway in a dark green dress that probably cost more than his monthly utilities. "Hi," she said. "Hi." He stepped back. "Come in. I'm almost ready." The apartment was clean. He'd cleaned it the night before, which Lily had observed with scientific interest, watching him mop the kitchen floor from her position on the couch. "Daddy, who's coming over?" He'd told her a friend. She'd accepted this with the particular gravity of a 6-year-old who knew she was being managed. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table when Victoria came in, drawing on a piece of construction paper with a concentration that suggested it was extremely important work. She glanced up once, assessed Victoria without ceremony, and went back to drawing. "Good morning," Victoria said. "Morning," Lily said. "Your dress is shiny." "Thank you." "I like your drawing." Lily looked up again, this time with slightly more interest. "It's a horse, but the legs are wrong." She held it up. The horse did have some structural issues, but it had a very good mane. "Do you know how to draw horses?" Victoria looked at Mason. He gave her absolutely nothing, just raised one eyebrow slightly like, "You're on your own." He was learning she could handle herself. "I do, actually," Victoria said. She pulled out the chair across from Lily and sat down. "Show me what you have so far." Mason finished getting dressed in about 4 minutes, which was roughly how long it took to put on the suit, the decent one, charcoal gray, which he'd had cleaned and pressed, and not a tie with the instructions from a video Danny had sent him at midnight because Danny found this whole situation hilarious. When he came back to the kitchen, Victoria was drawing a horse beside Lily's horse, and Lily was providing feedback with the authority of someone who'd been doing this for years. "The neck," Lily said. "It goes like—" She demonstrated with a sweeping gesture that nearly knocked over her juice. "Like this?" "More. More neck." Victoria gave it more neck. Lily considered this. "Better," she said, which from Lily meant excellent. Mason leaned against the kitchen doorframe and watched the two of them for a moment and felt something in his chest that he filed away under. "Don't think about it," and moved on. Guide. The drive to the Hamptons took 2.5 hours, partly because of traffic around the Queens Midtown Tunnel, and partly because Mason's GPS had strong opinions about surface streets. Victoria sat in the passenger seat and didn't comment on the truck, which was 8 years old and had a crack in the dashboard that he'd been meaning to fix, and a pine tree air freshener that Lily had picked out, and that Mason hated but couldn't remove for obvious reasons. They talked, because the drive was long, and silence for 2.5 hours would have been its own kind of strange. They talked about the cafe. She'd opened it 3 years ago, not as a vanity project, but because she'd grown up in homes that never felt like homes, and she'd wanted to create a place that felt like one, and a cafe seemed like the most honest version of that. She had 2 more in development, plus a boutique hotel concept that was still on paper, but that she could describe in exact detail. The light in the lobby, the weight of the room keys, the sound of the restaurant. You think about the sound of the restaurant? You think about the wiring before you think about the lights, right? Fair point. She asked him about his work, and he told her the true version, not the abbreviated one he gave people at parties who weren't really asking. He told her about the apprenticeship he'd started at 21, the years of learning from a guy named Carl who had 30 years of experience and the patience of a saint, the satisfaction of doing work that was invisible when it was done right and catastrophic when it wasn't. He told her about the particular pleasure of a clean install, everything running the way it was supposed to, a building that would be safe and functional because of work he'd done inside the walls. She listened to the whole thing, didn't redirect, didn't summarize him. They were somewhere past Riverhead when she said, "What's Lily's mother like?" He'd been expecting the question, roughly, because they'd agreed to cover the significant details. "Gone," he said. "She left when Lily was little. Not dramatically. She just realized she wanted a different life." He glanced in the rearview mirror by habit, even though Lily wasn't there. "I don't say that to make her the villain. I think it was honest of her to leave rather than stay and be someone she wasn't. That's a generous way to look at it. It's the useful way." He changed lanes. "Lily's happy. She doesn't ask about it much. When she does, I tell her the truth, which is that her mom loves her but lives far away. That's the whole truth, actually." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She seems like a good kid." "She is. She's also a lot. She doesn't do anything halfway." He said it with a kind of helpless pride. "She decided to learn chess 2 months ago, and she's been crushing me ever since. I taught her everything I know, and now I don't know anything." Victoria laughed. A real one. Not the polished social laugh he'd heard her use with customers, but the actual one, surprised out of her. It was a good sound. It sounded like someone who didn't let herself laugh like that very often. The venue was a waterfront estate that looked like it had been inherited, not purchased. White fences, manicured grounds, a tent the size of a small aircraft hangar set up on the south lawn, cars in the parking area that had clearly not been bought used. Mason pulled in and cut the engine, and they both sat there for a second looking at it. "Okay," Victoria said quietly. "Yeah. How are you doing?" "Fine." He turned to look at her. She was looking at the white tent, the guests moving between the parking lot and the entrance. The way you look at something you've been thinking about too much. "You? Ask me again when we're through the first hour." He got out first, came around to her side and opened her door. He'd done it without thinking. It was just what you did. She looked up at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite read, then took the hand he offered and stepped out. They walked in together. Her hand was in his arm. Light, correct. And she held herself like she had every right to be there, which she did. And he matched her pace and let her lead because she knew this territory, and he didn't. The first person they ran into was a woman named Helen, who kissed Victoria on both cheeks and immediately turned her eyes to Mason with the specific interest of someone conducting an evaluation. "This must be the husband," Helen said. "Mason Reed." He extended his hand, firm, steady. He'd shaken hands with more intimidating people than this on job sites. "Helen Voss. I've known Victoria for ages." She looked between them. "We didn't even know she'd gotten married. It was quite a surprise." "We kept it quiet," Mason said. "It felt right that way." "No big production," Victoria added, and her voice was level and easy and almost warm. "Just us." Helen looked like she was trying to decide if she believed this. Mason gave her nothing to doubt. He wasn't nervous. This was the thing, and he'd noticed it himself when they walked in. He wasn't nervous. He was calm in the specific way he was calm when a job was difficult and the stakes were high, and the only useful thing to do was focus and do the work. This was work. He was good at work. He saw Brandon Hayes for the first time an hour in, from across the tent. He'd formed an image of the man from what Victoria had told him. Not an uncharitable one, because Victoria wasn't given to unkindness even about people who'd hurt her, but he'd formed one. He'd expected someone polished and self-certain, the kind of man who moved through rooms like he'd been there before. Brandon Hayes was exactly that. Tall, dark-haired, the kind of tan that came from vacations rather than work, wearing a suit that fit the way suits in magazines fit. His new partner, Delphine, was beside him, elegant, effortless, the kind of woman who looked like she'd been born at parties like this one. They saw Victoria from across the room, and something happened in Brandon's face. A small recalibration, almost imperceptible. He looked at Mason next, longer. Victoria didn't look away. She finished what she was saying to the couple she'd been talking to, smiled, touched Mason's arm, a light press of fingers, and let the conversation move on naturally. "Did you see him?" Mason said quietly when they'd turned away. "Yes." "You okay?" "Keep talking to me," she said. "Just normally, like we're talking about something interesting." "Okay." He shifted toward her slightly, the way you do when you want the world to see that someone has your full attention. "Tell me about the hotel concept, the light in the lobby." She looked at him. Then she told him. Not the compressed version, the whole thing, the way she'd seen it in her head for 2 years, the specific kind of light she wanted, warm but not amber, the texture of the surfaces, the way sound would move through the space. She talked and he listened, and at some point she forgot they were performing anything, and it was just her telling him something she cared about, and he was just listening. That was when he noticed Brandon Hayes looking at them again from across the tent. Not with hostility, with something more complicated than that. They ate at a round table with 6 other guests. Business connections of Victoria's, mostly, people she knew professionally. Mason sat to her left and let her navigate the social architecture of it, while he ate his food and answered questions when they came to him and did not pretend to be something he wasn't. "What field are you in, Mason?" asked a man named Garrett, who had the haircut of someone who'd been important in the 90s. "Electrical contracting," Mason said. A brief pause, the polite recalibration of someone who'd expected a different answer. "Independent?" "Licensed contractor. I run a small crew on commercial projects mostly, some residential." He took a drink of water. "Been doing it for 10 years. "Victoria, I didn't know some," Garrett started. "Why would you?" Victoria said pleasantly. She reached over and put her hand briefly over Mason's on the table, and a small gesture, natural, easy. "He's not really someone who leads with his resume." Mason looked at her. She was looking at Garrett, but the corner of her mouth had a quality to it that he was learning to read. Not quite a smile, but something that happened just before one. He turned his hand over and pressed it lightly against hers before she pulled it back. Just for a second. She glanced at him. He looked away, back at Garrett, and said, "So what field are you in?" It was Brandon who approached them eventually. Mason had known he would. You could see it building from a distance, the way someone works himself up to something. Delphine was across the room talking to the bride's family, and Brandon moved through the tent with the kind of deliberateness that was trying to look casual. "Victoria." He kissed her cheek. She let him. "You look wonderful." "Thank you. So does Delphine." "Yes, she—" He paused. Let his gaze move to Mason. "I don't think we've met." "Mason Reed." He didn't offer his hand right away. Let Brandon be the one to extend first, which Brandon did, and Mason shook it with the same even grip he'd given Helen. No performance in either direction. Just here. "Brandon Hayes." A beat. "How long have you and Victoria—" "2 years," Mason said. "Give or take." Brandon nodded slowly, like he was processing arithmetic. "I had no idea she was— We didn't know she'd gotten married. We didn't really announce it." "No, well—" Brandon looked at Victoria. There was something in his face, not jealousy exactly, but close to it, and under it something more honest. Discomfort. The specific discomfort of someone looking at a version of events that doesn't match the story they told themselves. You seem happy." "I am," Victoria said. Simple as that. Brandon nodded again. "Good," he said. "That's good." He moved away, and Mason watched him go and felt the small, controlled exhale beside him before Victoria straightened up and looked back at the room. "You all right?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes." He nodded. "Good." She looked at him sideways, a look he was becoming familiar with, the one that went slightly past the surface of things. "He expected me to be smaller," she said. "He thought coming here would feel like winning something." "Does it?" "No." She paused. "It just feels like being here, which is enough." They stood together in the tent, the wedding moving around them, the afternoon light going golden through the canvas, and Mason thought about the cafe on a quiet Tuesday morning, and the drive out here with the pine tree air freshener and the wrong GPS route, and Lily drawing horses at the kitchen table. And he thought about how the simplest truth of the day was that he hadn't been pretending to listen when she talked about her hotel. He'd just been listening. The band started up at the far end of the tent, something slow and easy, and Victoria turned toward the sound, watching the couples move onto the small dance floor. "I should probably, she started. "Do you want to dance?" he said. She looked at him, not surprised exactly, but something like it. "You don't have to," she said. "I know." He turned toward her and extended his hand. "Do you want to?" A pause. Something working its way across her face that she didn't quite lock down in time. "Yeah," she said. "Okay." They walked out onto the floor together, and she put one hand on his shoulder, and he put one hand on her waist, and they started to move, and it wasn't graceful. He was an electrician from Brooklyn, not a dancer, and he was honest about that. But she didn't seem to need graceful. She was relaxed in a way she hadn't been when they walked in, her posture different, something set down. "You're a terrible dancer," she said. "Objectively," he agreed. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. He felt it against his shoulder. They kept dancing badly through the end of the song, and somewhere across the tent Brandon Hayes stood with his champagne and watched them, and the expression on his face was the thing he'd been trying not to show all day. They drove back to the city as the sun went down, the highway going rose and gray in the west. Lily was at Mrs. Okafor's until 9. He'd arranged it. And so the apartment was quiet when he got home, and Victoria had taken a car back to Manhattan, and the day was over. Mason sat in his truck in the parking spot behind his building for a few minutes after he killed the engine. The pine tree air freshener swayed faintly. The dashboard crack ran its familiar diagonal across the plastic. He thought about the way she'd said "I am" when Brandon asked if she was happy. Not with triumph, not with performance, just as a fact. He thought about her hand on the table. He thought about not thinking about it. He got out of the truck and went inside. He didn't go back to Birchen Grounds for 4 days. This wasn't intentional, or at least that's what Mason told himself. Monday, he had an early call on a commercial job in Long Island City. A restaurant build-out, the kind of work where you show up at 6 and the day eats you whole before you get a chance to think about anything personal. Tuesday he worked until 7 and came home to find Lily in a full argument with her stuffed elephant about who had cheated at a board game they'd apparently been playing alone, which required mediation and then dinner, and then the particular exhaustion of reading 3 chapters of a book about a girl who discovers a secret garden, stopping every few paragraphs because Lily had questions. Wednesday it rained and Mason drove the wrong way down a one-way street because he was thinking about something else and had to sit through a lecture from a cab driver who'd had to brake hard. He wasn't thinking about the wedding. He wasn't thinking about the way she'd felt when they danced, the warmth of her through the fabric of her dress, the way she'd gone relaxed against him like something had just let go. Thursday morning, he walked into Birch and Grounds at 7:15, same as always, work bag over one shoulder, coffee order already formed in his mouth. Victoria was behind the counter. She looked up when he came in. Something in her face did the thing it did sometimes, the small movement that happened before the careful expression came back. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He sat down at the counter. "Usual." She started on it without saying anything else. He watched her work, the efficient, unhurried movements she'd done 10,000 times, and thought about whether to say anything or whether they were just going to let the wedding settle into the past and go back to being 2 people who had coffee in the same building. She set the mug down in front of him. He didn't reach for it right away. "I've been thinking," he said. "About?" Brandon looked like someone told him a joke he didn't get. Victoria's expression didn't exactly change, but something lightened in it. She leaned against the counter. "He called me Sunday night." Mason looked up. "Did he?" "I didn't pick up." She reached under the counter and pulled out a banana bread she hadn't charged him for in months, set it beside his coffee. "He left a voicemail. Said he was glad I seemed to be doing well and that it was good to see me." She paused. "He said it was good to see me 4 times, in a 2-minute message. That's a lot of seeing. It really is." She moved to wipe down the espresso machine, her back to him. "I deleted it." "Good." She turned back around. They looked at each other for a moment, not uncomfortably, but with the weight of something that hadn't been said yet sitting between them. "I wanted to say thank you," Victoria said. "Properly. Not just getting out of the car. You already thanked me in the car. You drove me to the Hamptons and danced badly with me in front of 50 people. That requires a more formal acknowledgement. It was maybe 40 people on the dance floor. Mason." "You're welcome," he said. "It was fine. It was a good day." He picked up his coffee, took a drink, set it down. "How's your daughter?" you're going to ask. "I wasn't going to ask that. You were thinking about it." She didn't deny it. "How's Lily?" "Destroyed me at chess again yesterday. I'm thinking of hiring a coach." "For yourself or for her?" "For myself. She doesn't need one." Victoria smiled, the real one, not the cafe one, and went to help a customer who'd just come in, and Mason sat with his coffee and his banana bread and let himself admit, quietly, and without making too much of it, that the 4 days had felt longer than they should have. It was Victoria who suggested they get dinner the following week, and she said it the way she said most things, directly, without excessive setup. "There's a place on Commerce Street I've been wanting to check out. New Italian, been open 3 months. I want to see how they handle the room." She was cleaning up after closing time, Mason having stuck around after his morning coffee to fix a light fixture in the back hallway that had been flickering for 2 weeks, and that she'd mentioned in passing once. He'd come back after his workday with his tools without being asked, which she'd accepted without ceremony. "Come with me. You can tell me what they're doing wrong." "I don't know anything about restaurants." "You know when something feels right. That's all I need." The restaurant on Commerce Street was narrow and warm and impractical in its design. The tables too close together, the menu handwritten on a small blackboard that required genuine commitment to read from the back of the room. It was full on a Tuesday. That meant something. They sat at a corner table and ordered the linguine and a shared appetizer of something involving burrata and roasted tomatoes. And Mason watched Victoria look at the room the way he looked at wiring diagrams, reading the logic of it, where the flow worked, where it didn't, what the person who designed it was thinking. "The kitchen's too loud," she said. When the pass-through opens, you lose all the atmosphere. But the food's good. The food's very good. That's the problem. The bones are there, the energy is there, and they're losing it on execution. She turned the wine glass by the stem. This is what keeps me up at night. You can have the right idea and still ruin it by not thinking through the details. Like a bad wire connection, Mason said. Everything looks fine until the load hits and the whole thing goes. She pointed at him. Exactly like that. So for your hotel, the details you've been thinking about. Everything, the towel weight, the window placement, whether the elevator sounds anxious. She said it without irony. Elevators in cheap hotels sound like they're not sure they're going to make it. I want one that sounds like it knows where it's going. Mason laughed. An elevator with confidence. Yes, that's exactly it. How long have you been building this company? Sterling Hospitality? 6 years. The cafe was the first piece, then 2 more, then a boutique events venue in the meatpacking district. She picked up her fork, then set it down again without eating. My parents thought I was throwing my MBA away. My mother wanted me in finance. My father wanted me in law. The cafe was the thing they didn't understand at all. Why a cafe specifically? She was quiet for a moment. I grew up in a house where no one sat still, she said. We ate dinner in 30 minutes, and then everybody went to separate corners of the house. My parents were good people, I think, in the way that some people are good at being successful and less good at being present. She picked up her wine. The cafe felt like an antidote, a place where people come specifically to stay. Mason thought about his apartment in Sunset Park. The kitchen table where Lily did homework and drew horses and played chess. The way he always cooked on Sunday mornings and left the radio on and didn't rush anything. That makes sense, he said. You're doing it again, she said. What? Just listening, like you're actually interested. I am actually interested. She looked at him across the table like she was waiting for the catch, and he let her wait, and the catch didn't come. He started stopping by the cafe more often. Not every morning, his schedule didn't always allow it, but enough that Victoria began to know when his early starts were, and on those days she'd have his coffee ready by the time he reached the counter. He fixed the back hallway fixture, then the loose hinge on the utility door, then a faulty outlet in the kitchen that her regular electrician had misdiagnosed. She didn't offer to pay him for any of it, and he didn't ask. He also started talking to her more. He wasn't sure when that shift happened, somewhere between the restaurant on Commerce Street and a Saturday morning when he brought Lily to the cafe because Mrs. Okafor had a doctor's appointment and he had nowhere else to be, and Lily had sat at the counter on a stool and proceeded to occupy Victoria's complete attention for 45 minutes with a detailed explanation of why horses were superior to all other animals. Victoria had listened to the whole argument, had asked intelligent follow-up questions, had eventually conceded with apparent sincerity that horses were probably in the top 3. What are the other 2? Lily demanded. Elephants, Victoria said, and possibly ravens. Lily considered this for a long time. Ravens are scary, she finally said. They're very smart. Smart things can seem scary. Lily looked at her, then looked at Mason, then back at Victoria. Do you have kids? Lily, Mason started. No, Victoria said. I don't. Do you want them? That's... Mason tried again. It's okay, Victoria said to him. And to Lily, I don't know. I think I'd have to figure some things out first. Like what? Like whether I'm any good at it. Lily thought about this with genuine seriousness. You're pretty good at listening, she said. That's the main thing. Daddy says the main thing is that you listen when it matters. Mason looked at the ceiling. Your dad sounds smart, Victoria said. He's okay. Lily hopped off the stool. Can I have another hot chocolate? Victoria reached for the milk. The Friday 3 weeks after the wedding, Victoria called him at 6:30 in the evening. He was on the BQE, in traffic, the radio on low, Lily asleep in the back seat after her soccer practice. I'm sorry to call, she said. Is this a bad time? Traffic. But no, what's up? A pause. Helen Voss, the woman from the wedding, she's been calling around, asking questions about us. He changed lanes. What kind of questions? The timeline, how long we've actually been together, whether anyone knew us as a couple before the wedding. Another pause, briefer. She's friendly with Brandon. I think he might have asked her to check. Mason thought about this. Through the windshield, the highway was a long red snake of brake lights. What have you told her? I haven't picked up, but she'll leave a message eventually, and then I'll have to say something, and he could hear her turning over the options, the way she did when she was working through a problem. I'm not going to lie to people I have a business relationship with, Mason. That's a line I can't cross. Then don't lie. If I tell Helen the truth, it gets back to Brandon, and then the whole thing— What whole thing? He kept his voice even, quiet so Lily wouldn't stir. What exactly is the whole thing at this point? A silence, different from the others. I don't know, she said. He looked in the rearview mirror. Lily was curled against the window, her soccer cleats still on because she'd been too tired to take them off. Victoria. Yeah. What do you actually want here? Not the business version, the actual version. She didn't answer immediately. He didn't push. I don't want to have to explain it to Helen Voss, she said finally. I don't want to go back to being the woman Brandon left who showed up to his wedding alone. I want— She stopped. Started again, lower. I want what it felt like at that wedding to be real. I know that's not what we agreed to. Mason was quiet. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have said that. No, he said. Don't apologize. Mason, I'm not going to pretend I don't know what I've been doing every morning for 3 weeks, he said. You don't have to pretend either. The traffic loosened. He moved forward. In the back seat, Lily made a small sound and shifted and didn't wake up. Okay, Victoria said. Quiet. Okay, he said. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. He could hear the cafe sounds in the background on her end. The last cleanup of the evening, cups being stacked, the low music she always left on. She'll call again tomorrow, Victoria said. Let her. We've been together 2 years and we got married because it was right. That's what we know. Everything else is detail. You're remarkably calm about this. I fix things for a living, he said. You identify the problem, you trace it back to the source, and you figure out what actually needs to be done. Panicking in the middle of that doesn't help. She made a small sound that was close to a laugh, but wasn't quite. Is that the electrician's approach to personal crises? It's the only approach I know. It might be the best one. A beat. Lily okay? He glanced in the rear view. Asleep, still has her cleats on. How'd the game go? They lost, but she scored 1 goal and celebrated like it was the championship, so? Good for her. She'd agree. He heard her laugh then, the real one, the surprised one, and it did what it always did, which was make the traffic lighter and the evening less long. He took her to Sunset Park on Sunday. Not the park itself, his neighborhood, his regular circuit. The bakery on Fifth Avenue where he bought bread every week. The hardware store where the owner, a man named Gene, who was 70 and had the opinions of someone who had earned them, always had something to say about the quality of modern wire nuts. The small playground 2 blocks from his building where Lily had learned to pump her legs on the swing. He hadn't planned any of this. Victoria had shown him her world, her cafe, her restaurant on Commerce Street, the events venue she was renovating, and it had seemed fair and natural to show her his. Lily was with them, which was not accidental on either side. Lily treated Victoria with a practical openness that Mason sometimes envied. No calculation, no protection, just assessment and then acceptance. She held Victoria's hand crossing the street. Not because she was charming, but because she'd decided it was the sensible thing to do, and Victoria had accepted it the same way. At the playground, Lily went straight for the swings. Mason and Victoria sat on a bench nearby in the March cold, both with coffee cups from the bakery, watching her. She's fearless, Victoria said. About most things. He watched Lily pump higher. She's scared of thunder. Won't tell me, but I can always tell because she comes and gets in my bed without saying anything and pretends she was just checking on me. That's extremely sweet. Don't tell her that. Does she ask about her mom? He'd told Victoria the summary version in the car on the way to the Hamptons. Now, on this bench in the March cold, He told her the longer one. The way it had ended. Not badly, not well, just honestly. The specific loneliness of those first months when Lily was 2 and he was doing everything with no roadmap. The way Mrs. Okafor had appeared, practically, like someone had placed her there. She'd knocked on his door to complain about a leaky pipe and had ended up holding Lily while he fixed it and then had never quite stopped showing up. "I don't romanticize it," he said. "It's hard. Some weeks it's just, you're moving because stopping isn't an option." He took a drink of coffee. "But she's the best thing in my life. Not in the way you say it at holidays, in the actual way." Victoria was looking at Lily, who had reached maximum swing height and was now letting herself decelerate, satisfied. "My mother used to tell me that I was very easy to love," Victoria said, "but very difficult to know." She said it lightly, but it didn't land that way. I think she meant it as a compliment. I don't think it was. What does that mean? Easy to love? Polished, impressive, the kind of person people feel good being around because I make them feel like things are well managed. She turned the coffee cup in both hands. Difficult to know because I don't let people in very far. Because letting people in gave someone the ability to tell you you're not quite enough. And eventually, you just stop handing that out. Mason didn't say anything for a moment. Brandon? Brandon specifically. But he wasn't the first. She watched Lily get off the swing and study the climbing structure with the focus of an engineer. I let him in further than I've let most people, which is maybe why it went the way it did. I'd relaxed. I'd stopped managing it. She looked down at her coffee. I'm not going to do the thing where I make this sound like more damage than it is. I'm functional. I'm fine. But I notice that I don't relax very much. I notice it more recently. Recently like the last few weeks. He held his coffee cup. Didn't look at her. Let it be said into the air between them rather than straight at her. That's not a small thing. No, she agreed. It isn't. Lily had started up the climbing structure. She'd gotten about halfway and paused, not from fear but from tactical reassessment, working out a new route. Can I ask you something? Mason said. Yes. What are you afraid of? Not Brandon, not Helen Voss, the actual thing under all of it. Victoria was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, that I'll let someone matter, she said, and they'll decide eventually that some other version of their life is more important than the one that has me in it. He thought about that. About Carla, and the way she'd left. Not cruelly, just inevitably. About the year after, when Lily was 2 and he was doing it alone and the apartment felt very large. Yeah, he said. I know that one. She looked at him then. He looked back. The thing that had been building between them for weeks was there in the look, neither of them naming it, but neither of them looking away from it either. Daddy! Lily called from the top of the climbing structure. Look! They both looked. Lily was standing at the top with her arms out, balanced, pleased with herself. Don't fall, Mason called back. I'm not going to fall, Lily said, with the total confidence of someone who had never once in her life considered that she might fall. Victoria laughed beside him. He let himself feel the warmth of it in the cold March air and didn't try to do anything else with it. Not yet. Some things you just let be true before you decide what to do about them. The thing about falling for someone slowly is that you don't notice it until you're already there. Mason noticed it on a Wednesday evening in April when he was rewiring a junction box in the back kitchen of Birch and Grounds. Victoria had closed early and he'd come by after his last job, tools still in the bag, to handle something she'd mentioned in passing about a breaker that kept tripping. She was at the front counter doing paperwork, laptop open, reading glasses on that she'd never worn in front of him before. The cafe was empty and quiet, and the streetlights had just come on outside, and he was lying on his back under the counter with a flashlight in his mouth, and he thought, without trying to, I could do this for a long time. Not the wiring, the whole shape of it. Her at the counter, him in the back, Lily's drawings on the refrigerator at home that had started including a figure with long dark hair that Lily called the coffee lady without apparent self-consciousness. He finished the junction box, came out, wiped his hands on a rag, started packing his tools. Fixed? Victoria said without looking up. Should hold. You had a loose neutral. Whoever wired this originally was in a hurry. The original electrician was a friend of a friend. I should have known. You know one now. She looked up over her glasses at that. He hadn't meant it to land the way it did. Weighted, a little unguarded, but it had, and they both knew it. She held his gaze for a second before looking back at her laptop. I do, she said quietly. He zipped his bag. I'll get out of your way. You're not in my way. He stayed. He sat at the counter with a coffee she poured him without asking, and she finished what she was working on. A lease review for the second cafe location, a space in the West Village she'd been negotiating on for 2 months, and read sections of it aloud to him when she needed a second opinion, not on the legal language but on the feeling of it. Does this sound like they're going to be difficult landlords? He read the paragraph she indicated. Yeah, he said. They put 3 clauses in one sentence. That's someone who wants options. She looked at him. That's exactly what it is. It was 11 o'clock before either of them looked at the time. Bullshit. He asked her to dinner that Friday. Directly, without engineering a reason for it. Not to check out a room, he said. Just dinner. She said yes, like she'd been waiting for him to ask, which maybe she had. They went to a Jamaican place in Crown Heights that his friend Danny had been recommending for 2 years and that Mason had never gotten around to. The food was serious, the kind of jerk chicken that required full attention, and the restaurant was loud enough that they had to lean in to hear each other, which meant they spent most of the meal closer together than they normally were. At one point she reached across and took a piece of his plantain without asking, and he said, "Help yourself," and she said, "I just did." And they were both laughing, and it was easy, embarrassingly easy, the way things get when you stop trying to manage them. They walked after, the April night cool but not cold, the kind of Brooklyn evening where everyone is outside because the winter finally let go. She put her hand in his arm the way she had at the wedding, except this time there was no one watching and no reason except that it was natural. And he covered her hand briefly with his, and they walked like that through Prospect Park, not saying much, the city humming around them. On the street outside the subway entrance, she turned to face him. The light was that particular orange-yellow of New York at night, and she was looking at him with an expression he recognized now, the one where she was deciding how far to go. He made it easier. He kissed her. She kissed him back. It wasn't elaborate, just a long, quiet moment on a Brooklyn sidewalk with someone walking a dog past them and a car honking 2 blocks over. When they separated, she had her hands on the front of his jacket, and she was looking at him with something that might have been relief. "I've been thinking about doing that for a while," she said. "Me too." "Why didn't you?" "Because you needed the time, and because I wanted to be sure." "Sure of what?" "That I wasn't going to make a mess of it." He looked at her steadily. "I still might, but at least it won't be for lack of trying." She made a sound, somewhere between a laugh and something more serious. "That's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me before a first kiss. I don't really know how to be any other way." She took her hands off his jacket, looked at him for another moment. "I know," she said. "That's the thing." April became May in the way New York springs do, quickly, loudly, the trees going from bare to full in what feels like a single week, the city surfacing from winter like it remembered how to be warm. Mason and Victoria fell into something that didn't have a clean name but had a definite shape. Dinners on Wednesday, Saturdays in the cafe before he picked up Lily from soccer, occasional evenings when she came to Sunset Park and sat at the kitchen table while he cooked, and Lily provided commentary on everything from his knife technique to the structural integrity of his mashed potatoes. Lily had assessed Victoria with characteristic directness and arrived at a conclusion she communicated without ceremony. She let Victoria read to her one Saturday night when Mason was finishing a work call, which was a thing Lily did not allow from everyone. She was protective of her bedtime reading, which Mason understood because he was too, and offering that slot to someone meant they'd passed a test that had never been announced. He found them afterward on the couch, Lily asleep against Victoria's arm, the book face down on the cushion. Victoria was very still, not moving so Lily wouldn't wake, looking at the ceiling with an expression Mason couldn't read from the doorway. He came in quietly, picked Lily up, 6 years old and already not small, but she went limp the way sleeping children do, easy weight, and carried her to bed. When he came back, Victoria was still on the couch, but she'd shifted, turned her knees in, and she looked not sad, exactly. Thoughtful in a way that went somewhere he didn't have access to yet. "You okay?" he said. "Yeah." She said it quickly, then reconsidered. "I don't know. Yes." She looked at him. "She asked me tonight if I was going to be around." He sat down beside her. "What did you say?" "I said I hoped so." She turned the book over in her hands. "Is that the right answer?" "It was an honest one." She said good, and then fell asleep on me, which felt like a verdict. "With Lily, it is." Victoria set the book down, looked at her hands. "I'm not scared of you," she said. "I want to say that first because everything else I'm about to say might sound like I am. But I'm not scared of you. I'm scared of being the thing that—" She paused, chose words carefully. "You have a whole architecture, your life, your work, your daughter, Mrs. Okafor, the hardware store, the truck with the cracked dashboard. It works. You built it to work. And I keep thinking about what it means for me to be inside that. You're not threatening the architecture. How do you know? People think that until someone rearranges the walls." He turned to look at her fully. "Victoria, you fixed a broken thing without knowing you were doing it. Lily trusts you." He stopped, said it plainly. "I haven't wanted to bring anyone into Lily's life. It felt irresponsible, too much for her to lose if it didn't work out. And then you were just already there, and she'd already decided, and I realized I'd been the one overthinking it. Don't make me sound easier than I am. I'm not. You're a lot. You're particular about things. You think about elevator sounds. You close people out when you feel exposed. You apologized to me once for having feelings, and I wanted to—" He stopped himself. "You're not easy, but you're worth it. And I think you know I mean that because I don't say things I don't mean." She looked at him for a long moment, then leaned over and put her head on his shoulder, not romantically, not dramatically, just settling, like finding the right place. "I know," she said. "I know you do." They sat like that for a while, the apartment quiet around them, Lily asleep down the hall. Mason didn't feel the need to say anything else. Some things didn't need more words added to them. The call from Chicago came on a Tuesday morning in the third week of May. Mason was on a job site in Midtown, a commercial renovation, 3 floors of a building near Grand Central being converted from office space to mixed use. He had 4 guys working under him and a timeline that required everything to go right, which in construction meant nothing went right. But you managed the gap between expectation and reality until the two came close enough to shake hands. His foreman, a guy named Prescott, who communicated primarily through eyebrow movements, appeared at his elbow at 11:15. "Call from a 312 number," Prescott said. "They called the site office because you weren't picking up your cell." Mason looked at his phone. 3 missed calls. He'd had it in his vest pocket, and the job site was loud. He stepped away from the noise, called back. The man on the other end was named Robert Carver, director of project development for a construction group out of Chicago. Meridian Build, which Mason knew by reputation, had followed for years. They were doing an infrastructure project on the city's north side, major commercial and residential complex, 18-month build. They needed a lead electrical contractor who could run a crew and manage a large-scale wiring installation from the ground up. Someone had given them Mason's name. He'd been doing work long enough that his name got given sometimes. The salary Carver mentioned was almost exactly double what Mason was currently making. He stood on the sidewalk outside the building and let Carver talk for 10 minutes, asking questions at the right points, keeping his voice neutral. He said he'd need to think about it. Carver said, "Of course, take a week." They needed someone in place by July. Mason hung up and stood there. A cab went by. Someone's lunch order was being delivered on a bicycle, the bag swaying. The city doing its thing, indifferent to the fact that he'd just been offered the job he'd have answered yes to 3 years ago without needing to think about it at all. He called Danny. "Talk to me," Danny said. Mason told him. Danny was quiet for a moment, then, "That's the Meridian job? The Northside complex?" "Yeah." "Mason, that's the kind of job that changes what's possible afterward." "I know." "So, what's the problem?" Mason looked up at the building he was supposed to be wiring. Lily's in school. Mrs. Okafor is here. Everything's. He stopped. Danny waited. Then, is this about the cafe woman? It's not just about Mason. A pause. I don't know, Mason said. It's a lot of pieces. The pieces all point the same direction, man. I'm not telling you what to decide, but you know which one's the hard part. He didn't tell Victoria that night. He told himself it was because he hadn't decided anything, which was true. He needed to think, and he thought better when he wasn't talking, and bringing it into a conversation before he'd worked through it himself would just be handing her a problem he hadn't solved yet. What he didn't tell himself, but was true anyway, was that he was afraid of what her face would do when he said it. They had dinner that Wednesday, her apartment this time, in the West Village, because the lease on the new cafe space had finally come through and she'd made pasta to celebrate and burned the garlic slightly and the smoke alarm had gone off, and she'd waved a dish towel at it, irritated, while he stood in her kitchen trying not to smile. The pasta was good despite the garlic. Her apartment was exactly what he'd expected and slightly different, organized in the way of someone with a clear sense of what belonged where, but with small irregularities. A stack of books on the coffee table that hadn't been shelved yet. A throw blanket bunched at the end of the couch that was clearly the one she actually used. A photo on the bookshelf. Younger Victoria at what looked like a graduation, standing with two people who must have been her parents, all three of them smiling in the way people smile when a camera appears. Your parents? He said. My graduation from Columbia. She handed him a glass of wine. We get along better now. Distance helps. Where are they? Boston. My father teaches economics at Tufts. My mother runs a nonprofit. She leaned against the bookshelf. They're impressive people. I spent a long time trying to be what impressed them, and then I spent a long time being annoyed at myself for caring, and now I'm somewhere in the middle of all that. Does your mom know about... He gestured vaguely, meaning us, whatever this is. I told her I was seeing someone. She said it without looking at him, turning back toward the kitchen. She asked if he was in the right field. I told her he was in the right field for me. He followed her into the kitchen. She was at the stove, stirring something. He stood beside her. Victoria. I got a job offer. She stopped stirring, didn't turn. Okay. Chicago, big construction group, 18-month project, lead contractor, full crew. He said it straightforwardly, the way he said everything. Good money, the kind of project that opens doors. She turned then. Her face was doing the thing, the careful expression coming down like a shade. Not hostile, just controlled. When did you find out? Tuesday. A beat. It's Thursday. I needed to think first. She set the spoon down on the rest beside the stove, turned to face him fully. He could see her working through it, the information, what it meant, what the calculation looked like from where she stood. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. That's true. I'm not telling you as a decision. I'm telling you as something you should know about. Because it affects... He stopped. Because it affects us, she said. Yes. She looked at him. Her jaw had a quality to it that he'd learned meant she was holding something in. Lily would have to come with me, or I'd do weekends, fly back. I don't know what that would look like yet. And us. He held her gaze. That's why I'm telling you. She turned back to the stove, picked up the spoon, stirred something that didn't need stirring. He stood beside her and let her think. It's a good opportunity, she said finally. Yeah. You should take it. Her voice was neutral. Not cold, just flattened down. That's not what I asked. You didn't ask anything. Victoria. She set the spoon down again, harder this time. What do you want me to say? That you shouldn't go? That's not... I'm not going to be the thing that costs you this, Mason. You have a daughter to think about. You have your future, her future. I'm not... She stopped, controlled herself. I'm not going to be that person. He watched her. She was very still, the kind of still that took effort. He knew this one. He'd been here himself the year Lily was 2, making himself steady so the floor didn't drop out. You're doing it, he said. I'm not doing anything. You're deciding for me. She looked at him. Her face did something then, just briefly, the careful expression cracking at one corner. and she looked away. I'm being practical. You're protecting yourself by calling it practical. That's... She turned, and her eyes were bright in a way they hadn't been before. Not crying, not yet, but close to it. That's not fair. I know. He said it gently. But it's true. She looked at him for a long moment, then looked away, at the stove, at nothing. The silence was different from the other silences. This one had edges. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. I don't know how to be the person who asks you to stay. I don't know if I even have the right. You have the right. Do I? We've been doing this it's been 2 months, Mason. You have a daughter. There's so much more at stake for you than Victoria. He stepped closer, close enough that she'd have to look at him or actively avoid it. She looked at him. 2 months of this is worth more to me than most things I've had for longer. Her breath went a little unsteady. Don't say that. Why not? Because I already want you to stay. And you saying things like that makes it very hard to be rational about why you shouldn't. He put his hand on her jaw, lightly, and she closed her eyes for a second, and something went out of her shoulders that had been held there. I haven't decided, he said. I'm telling you that. I haven't decided because you're part of what I'm deciding about. And I needed you to know that before any decision got made. She opened her eyes, looked at him. Chicago, she said. They want an answer in a week. A week? She stepped back, not away from him, just creating some air. She was going back into her head. He could see it. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay as in I need to... She turned, picked up the spoon again, put it down. Can we just eat? She said. Can we just eat and not... I need to think. Yeah, he said. Okay. They ate. The pasta was good. They talked about the cafe lease and Lily's school play. She had a non-speaking role as a tree that she was treating with the utmost seriousness, and the cracked dashboard that Mason had finally gotten a quote on fixing. They talked about everything except Chicago, and underneath all of it was Chicago, constant and unavoidable as a low-frequency sound. He went home at 11. She walked him to the door, and he kissed her, and she kissed him back. And it was different from the others, slower, with something careful in it, like someone memorizing. I'll call you, he said. I know. She leaned against the doorframe, looked at him with that expression he'd learned to read, the one where she was further away than she appeared. Mason. Yeah. Whatever you decide... She stopped, tried again. Whatever you decide, I want it to be the right thing. For Lily. For your life. Not adjusted around me. He looked at her for a long moment. She meant it. That was the thing about Victoria. When she said something like that, she meant it the whole way through, even when it cost her. I hear you, he said. He walked to the elevator. She was still in the doorway when the doors opened. He stepped in, turned. She raised one hand, brief, and looked at him with the kind of expression that people put away very carefully after, like something breakable. The doors closed. He made the decision 4 days later, not in a dramatic moment, not at his desk with papers spread out, not in the middle of a conversation that forced his hand. He was giving Lily a bath on a Sunday night, the bathroom tiles cold, the water exactly the wrong temperature twice before he got it right. Lily explaining with great authority the proper method for washing a rubber duck, and he thought about what Victoria had said in her kitchen. Whatever you decide, I want it to be the right thing. He thought about 2 months that felt like longer. He thought about the hotel concept and elevator sounds, and a playground bench in Sunset Park in the cold. He thought about what it would mean to make a different kind of choice. Not the one that made the most financial sense on paper, the one that made sense when he thought about the specific shape of the life he actually wanted. He called Robert Carver Monday morning. He thanked him, said it was a serious offer and he'd given it real thought, said he had roots here, work he was building, a family situation that made Chicago not the right move right now. Carver was professional about it, said the door wasn't closed, that the company had ongoing projects, and that Mason's name was on a list that didn't get forgotten. They ended the call without bitterness on either side. Mason put his phone in his pocket and stood on the sidewalk outside his building in the morning light and waited for the regret. A little came, Honest, clean, the way you feel when you close a real door. But underneath it was something more settled, something that had been there since Sunday night in the bathroom with Lily and the rubber duck. He picked up his phone and called Victoria. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said, careful, like she'd been waiting. "I called Carver," he said. A pause. "And?" "I told him no." Silence on her end, long enough that he said, "Victoria." "Don't," she said. Her voice was tight. "Don't what?" "Don't tell me you did it for me. Please don't tell me that." "I didn't do it for you." He meant it. "I did it because when I thought about what I actually want my life to look like, Chicago wasn't in it. You are. Lily is. The work I'm building here is. That's not you making the decision. That's me." Another silence. He waited. "I told you not to arrange yourself around me," she said. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard before. "I specifically said, you said don't adjust the decision around you. I didn't. I factored you in, which is different. You don't exclude someone from a life decision because including them feels like a risk. That's the thing you do when you're scared. And I'm not." He heard her breath, unsteady, the way it had gone in her kitchen. "Mason." "Yeah." "I'm standing in the cafe," she said. "In the middle of the cafe." "Okay. I have customers." "I know. I'm not asking you to do anything right now. I just wanted you to know." Another pause, then quieter. "Come in this morning." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He walked to the subway with his hands in his jacket pockets and the May air on his face. And he wasn't thinking about Chicago. He was thinking about the cafe on West 23rd with the uneven letters in the window and the mismatched chairs. And the woman behind the counter who thought about elevator sounds and burned garlic and fell asleep reading to a 6-year-old. And how the simplest thing he knew was that some places you walked into and some doors, once you went through, you didn't look back at. He took the train. He walked into the cafe at 7:43, and there were 4 customers at tables, and Victoria was behind the counter, and she looked up when the door opened and something crossed her face that she didn't bother managing. She came around the counter, didn't say anything, just walked up to him and put both arms around him and pressed her face against his shoulder, and he put his arms around her and held her there, in the middle of the cafe with 4 customers pretending not to watch. "You're an idiot," she said into his jacket. "Probably," he said. "I told you not to. I know what you told me." She pulled back. Her eyes were dry. She'd made sure of that. But her face had the quality it got when she'd been holding something in for too long. She looked at him steadily for a moment, then touched his jaw, brief and light, the way you touch something you've been afraid of losing. "Coffee," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She made his coffee. The cafe went back to its regular sounds. Outside, May was doing what May did, bright and unreasonable and loud with green. She set the mug in front of him and leaned on the counter across from him and said in a quieter voice than normal, "Tell me this is actually what you want. Not what you decided in a good moment. Actually." "Actually?" he said. "Because I will support you if you call Carver back. I mean that." "I know you mean it. That's part of why I didn't." She held his gaze. He held hers. Whatever she was looking for, she found it, because she exhaled slowly and picked up her own coffee. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Don't do something heroic and then make me feel guilty about it later. That's not how I operate. Just establishing the terms." "Noted." He took a drink. "Are there other terms?" She almost smiled. "I'll think of them. Tochat." What came after was the part nobody tells you about, the part where things are good, and that itself is the thing you don't quite know how to handle. Mason had lived in the conditional for so long, the once things settle down and the when Lily's older, and the baseline assumption that his personal life was the thing that got managed around everything else. That having something real and present and not requiring management felt slightly suspicious, like he was waiting for it to reveal the catch. The catch didn't come. June arrived, and they were still standing, which felt like an achievement. Victoria came to Lily's school play and sat beside Mason in the 3rd row and watched Lily stand in the back left corner as a tree for 40 minutes with absolute commitment. arms overhead, expression grave, occasionally swaying in the manufactured wind. And afterward, Lily came running out in her costume and grabbed Victoria's hand and said, "Did you see my branch?" Meaning a specific moment in the second act when she'd extended one arm dramatically, unscripted. "I saw it," Victoria said. "It was the best branch." Lily accepted this as fact. He met her parents in late June, which was not planned. Her mother, Diane, came to New York for a board meeting, and Victoria told Mason about it the night before in a tone that suggested she was bracing for something. And he said, "Do you want me to come?" And she said no, and then 30 seconds later, "Maybe yes, if you want." He wanted. Diane Sterling was a version of Victoria with more years and fewer questions, the same direct gaze, the same particular stillness, but with the specific relaxedness of someone who'd stopped trying to prove something a while back. She shook Mason's hand and looked at him the way Victoria looked at rooms, assessing for structure and load-bearing capacity. "Victoria said you're an electrician," she said, at the restaurant Victoria had chosen, which was quiet enough for a real conversation and not so formal that it was a statement. "Licensed contractor," Mason said. "Commercial mostly. In New York. For now. The plan's to scale up, more complex projects, eventually my own operation." Diane looked at him. "For now" suggests the plan has flexibility. Plans should. Otherwise, you're not planning, you're just hoping. A pause. Diane glanced at Victoria, something passing between them that was too fast to read. "Victoria tells me you have a daughter," Diane said. "Lily. She's 6. How does she feel about all this?" "She's teaching Victoria how to draw horses. She considers that a solid foundation." Diane looked at him for another moment, then something in her face changed. Not warmth exactly, but the absence of evaluation. She picked up her menu. "The fish here is very good," she said, and that was apparently the end of the interview. In the cab home, Victoria sat close to him and said nothing for several blocks. "She liked you," she finally said. "She tolerated me. For my mother, that's the same thing." She looked out the window. "She asked me before dinner if I was being careful." "What did you say?" "I said I was being as careful as I knew how to be, which is not very." She turned from the window. She said that was probably fine. He took her hand. She let him, which she always did now without any apparent effort, though he remembered when it had taken something. The problem arrived the way problems usually arrive, not all at once, but in pieces, beginning with something that seemed manageable. Helen Voss had not gone away. She'd called twice more, left 2 more messages, which Victoria had finally returned with a brief, neutral call that answered nothing directly and left Helen unsatisfied. That had seemed like the end of it. But in early July, at an industry event that Victoria attended, a hospitality networking dinner in Tribeca, the kind of thing that was ostensibly about the industry and practically about who stood next to whom. Helen was there, and Brandon was there, and Brandon had apparently been talking to Helen. Victoria told Mason about it the next morning, sitting at his kitchen table with her hands around a coffee mug, Lily still asleep down the hall. "He pulled Helen aside at some point," she said, "and whatever he said, when Helen came over to me afterward, she had this look, like she'd been told something." Victoria set the mug down. "She asked me if I was happy, not a pleasantry, specifically, like it was a question with a wrong answer." "What did you say?" "I said yes, because I am." She looked at him. And then she said, Brandon's worried about you." And I said Brandon should worry about his own wife. Mason raised an eyebrow. "How did that land?" "About how you'd expect?" She pulled her knees up to the chair slightly, the posture she got when she was thinking out loud. "He's been telling people things. I don't know what exactly, but I got 3 texts from people who were at the wedding, asking how I was doing, in the specific way that means someone told them to check. Brandon told them to check." "Why would he do that?" She was quiet. "Victoria." "Because he saw us at the wedding," she said carefully, "and he's been building a story in his head ever since. And the story is that I'm not actually—" She stopped. "He thinks it was fake," Mason said. "I think he's starting to." She looked at Mason. "He can't accept that I'm actually okay. That feels worse to him than if I'd fallen apart." So he's decided there's an explanation, that the marriage was staged, that I needed saving, and you were. She exhaled. It's Brandon's version of events, which is that he's still the most important thing in the story. Mason sat back. Let the information settle. What happens if he's right, if he tells people? He doesn't know. He's speculating. He has no way to. She stopped again. Her face went somewhere he recognized, the analytical place working the problem. Except that if enough people believe it, it becomes its own kind of damage. The investors I'm in conversations with, the contacts, the people talk. In the circles he runs in the circles that matter for my business, a story like that has weight even without evidence. So what do we do? She looked at him. I don't know. I've been thinking about it since last night, and there's no clean way out of it. He thought about it. Outside, the city was waking up, the sounds of trucks and early traffic starting to accumulate. The only person who can actually hurt you with this is Brandon, he said, and the only reason he's doing it is because you're not where he expected you to be, which is devastated and alone. He turned his coffee cup. What if he knew, directly, not through Helen, not through rumors? What if you sat down with him and he understood clearly that there's nothing to speculate about? You want me to talk to him. I want the situation to not have power over you, which means taking the power back. He shrugged. Or you could let it sit. Some things collapse on their own weight. Not Brandon's certainties. He holds them. She looked at the table. He always did. He decided something, and it was decided. Then he needs to hear it from you directly. She was quiet for a long time, then, will you come with me? If you want. I want. The meeting with Brandon was not a meeting. It was a coffee, or that was the word Victoria used when she texted him. Can we get coffee? I'd like to talk. He agreed with the speed of someone who'd been waiting to be asked. They met at a place in the West Village, neutral ground, a coffee shop that had nothing to do with any of them. Mason came with her, but sat at a table on the other side of the room, which was Victoria's call and the right one. This was her thing to do. He was just there so she'd know where to look if she needed to. He watched from across the room. Brandon arrived 3 minutes late, calculated, probably, or just how he operated, and kissed Victoria on both cheeks and sat down. He was well-dressed in the way he always was, relaxed in the practiced way of someone accustomed to controlling a room. He hadn't spotted Mason yet, or had spotted him and was ignoring him strategically. Hard to tell with Brandon. He watched their body language. Brandon leaning forward, at first, Victoria holding herself with a stillness that he knew took effort, but looked effortless. She talked. Brandon listened, and he watched something shift in Brandon's posture, the lean forward becoming something more guarded. Then Brandon said something. Mason couldn't hear it, but he saw Victoria's response. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, just held Brandon's gaze and said something short, clear. Brandon looked across the room then, found Mason, held it for a moment. Mason held it back. Not aggressively, just here. Brandon looked away first. 10 minutes later, Victoria was at Mason's table, dropping into the seat across from him. She looked wrung out, the way you look when you've done something that took more out of you than you'd budgeted. How'd it go? Mason said. I told him the truth. She picked up Mason's coffee and drank from it without asking. Not the whole truth, not the wedding fake husband truth, but that what he saw, us, was real, and that whatever story he'd built to explain it to himself needed to be taken apart. And? He asked if Mason was the reason I wasn't responding to him after the wedding. She set the cup down. I said you were the reason I didn't need to. Mason looked at her. How'd he take that? Like a man who's used to being the most important chapter and just found out he's a footnote. She sat back. He's not a bad person. That's the infuriating thing. He's just someone who never actually looked at me. And he doesn't understand how that's possible because he's always looked at everything so carefully. Some things you look at from the wrong angle. She considered this. He's going to stop with Helen. He won't cause problems. I could tell, Ishis, when you looked at him across the room, something just... He understood what he was looking at. What was he looking at? She met his eyes. Something he didn't break, she said. July became August, and August in New York was what it always was. Too hot, too loud, the city at its most excessive and most itself. They fell into the rhythms of something that had stopped being new and was now just theirs. He kept clothes at her apartment. She had a drawer at his that had started with one item and was now, without announcement, 4 or 5. Lily had started calling her Victoria instead of the coffee lady, which was a significant reclassification that Lily had made without ceremony, and that both adults had noted privately with more feeling than they showed. There were hard days. Mason worked long hours on the Midtown project, and some nights he came home short-tempered and unable to explain why, and Lily bore the brunt of it once or twice when she deserved better. He apologized both times. Lily accepted with the pragmatic grace of a child who understood the basic deal, that her dad was doing his best and his best was not perfect, and that was fine. But the moment still stung after. He didn't want to be the parent who brought his bad days home. Victoria had her own hard days. The West Village Cafe build-out was running behind schedule because of a contractor issue, and there was a week in August where she was on the phone with architects and city inspectors and her own business manager in a cycle that left her clipped and distracted. She arrived at his apartment on a Thursday night and was 4 sentences into a sentence about the inspector when she stopped and pressed both hands over her face. "I'm doing it," she said. "Doing what?" "Bringing my work here. I said I wouldn't." "You can bring your work here." "I don't want to be someone who—" "Victoria." He said it gently. "Sit down. Tell me about the inspector. I'll make dinner." She looked at him through her fingers. "You don't want to hear about the inspector." "I really don't," he said honestly, "but you need to say it out loud, and I'm here." She laughed, the surprised one, and sat down and told him about the inspector, and he made pasta with the good olive oil she'd brought over a month ago that had quietly become a fixture on his counter, and Lily came out of her room to provide opinions on the inspector situation. "Fire him," she said, without knowing what an inspector was, and Victoria said, "I'm working on it." And it was imperfect, and it was ordinary, and it was the specific kind of evening that Mason would not have traded for anything on offer. The thing nobody told you about good things was that they had their own kind of weight. In the last week of August, Mason was at the Midtown site going over second-floor plans with Prescott when his phone buzzed. A New York number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail, checked it on his break. The voicemail was from a woman named Claire Dempsey, a project coordinator for a development company called Faro Group, which was doing a major mixed-use project in Long Island City, the new waterfront development that had been in the papers, 7 buildings, biggest private project the borough had seen in 15 years. She'd gotten his name from 2 different references, she said. She was interested in talking about a long-term contract, lead electrical across all 7 structures, a deal that would run 3 years. 3 years. His own crew, his own schedule within the project framework, a fixed contract that would let him plan properly instead of job to job. The kind of stability he'd been working toward for a decade. In Long Island City. That was 12 minutes on the G train. That was staying. He sat on a bucket in a half-finished hallway and called her back. They talked for 20 minutes. The numbers were serious. The timeline was serious. She wanted a meeting the following week with her development team. He hung up and sat there and felt something open up in his chest that he hadn't entirely known was closed. He called Victoria. She answered on the first ring. She was in a building inspection, she whispered, but she stepped into the hall. "You okay?" she said. "Yeah," he told her. She was quiet while he talked. "Mason," she said when he finished. "Yeah. That's the right project. That's the one. It's not done yet. It's a meeting. You'll get it. You don't know that. I know you." She said it simply, no performance. "Go to the meeting. Tell me everything after." He leaned his head back against the wall behind him. The half-finished hallway smelled like fresh drywall and sawdust, which was one of his favorite smells, which said something about who he was. "Victoria," he said. "Yeah. I'm not going anywhere." A pause. He could hear the building she was in, the faint sounds of an inspection team somewhere, voices, footsteps on a hard floor. "I know," she said. "I know that." And the way she said it was different from how she would have said it 3 months ago. Not like a hope, not like something she was working to believe, just a fact she'd arrived at and put down somewhere safe. "How's the inspector?" he said. "Still employed, barely." A breath that was almost a laugh. "Get back to work." "You too." He was in the cafe the last Saturday of August when Brandon came in. He didn't see him until he was already there. Mason had his back to the door, working on a cup of coffee and the Long Island City project specs he'd spread on the counter because Victoria had told him to use the space, and he heard the door and heard Victoria's voice change and turned on the stool. Brandon stood near the entrance. He looked around the cafe with the careful look of someone who'd thought about how this would go and was finding the reality slightly different. His gaze moved to Mason, stopped. Victoria was behind the counter. Her voice was neutral and professional. "Can I help you?" Brandon looked at her. "I was in the neighborhood. I wanted to see the place." "You've been in the neighborhood before," Victoria said. "This is the first time you've come in." "I know." He didn't have a good answer for that. He looked around at the mismatched chairs, the hand-lettered sign, the quiet that the cafe had at mid-morning when the rush had passed. "It's good," he said. It's good, Victoria." "Thank you." He looked at Mason again. Mason looked back at him. "I owe you an apology," Brandon said. He was talking to Victoria, but he was aware of Mason in the way you're aware of a structural element that isn't moving. "The thing with Helen, I was doing the thing I do, where I construct a version of events that makes sense to me, and I needed it to be a particular version." "I know," Victoria said. "I'm sorry." "I know that too." He nodded, looked at the counter, the tiles, the espresso machine. "I told Delphine about the things I'd said to you. When we ended things. The way I said them." He paused. "She was not impressed with me." "She sounds smart," Victoria said. Something flickered in his face, almost a smile. "She is." He looked at Victoria for a moment, and it was the most honest look Mason had seen from him. Not calculated, not managing. Just a man looking at something he'd walked away from and trying to understand the actual shape of what it was. "You're happy." "I am." "Good." He said it like he meant it, like he'd gotten there finally, through whatever internal work it took. That's actually good." He left without ordering anything. The door closed behind him and the cafe went back to itself. The espresso machine and the street noise and the morning light through the front glass. Victoria stood behind the counter for a moment. Then she looked at Mason. "Well," she said. "Yeah." She stopped. "That was the first time I've ever felt like the conversation we were having was actually about what it was about." "He's learning," Mason said. "Slowly. Very slowly. Most people do." He turned back to his specs. "Can I get a refill?" She took his cup, refilled it, set it back down. Her hand rested on the counter near his for a moment. Just near, touching the edge of his papers. And he put 2 fingers over hers, briefly, and they both looked at the specs like they were the most interesting thing in the room. The cafe was quiet. The morning was long, August was almost over, and fall was coming, and somewhere in the near future was a meeting with Faro Group and a second cafe in the West Village, and a 6-year-old who was going to start 2nd grade in 3 weeks and had already begun negotiating about her school supplies with the intensity of someone who understood the stakes. Mason looked at the specs. Victoria went back to the counterwork. The pine tree air freshener in his truck, parked outside, swayed in the faint wind. None of it was perfect, not one piece of it, but it was real, which was better. September came in loud and then went quiet, the way New York Septembers do. First week, all heat and resistance, and then one morning you wake up and the air has changed, and everything smells like the beginning of something. Lily started 2nd grade on a Wednesday. Mason walked her to school, which he did every year regardless of how the morning was going, regardless of whether the job started early and he had to run after. This was non-negotiable. Lily wore new sneakers that she'd chosen herself, purple, with a reflective stripe that she'd tested approximately 40 times by shining a flashlight at them the night before, and she held his hand for exactly 1 block and then let go because they were approaching the school and there was a standard to maintain. At the door she turned and gave him one of her looks, the assessing one, the one that knew more than it let on. "Is Victoria coming to the open house?" He'd been walking her to school and she dropped that with 3 seconds left on the clock. "I don't know," he said. "Do you want her to?" "She should see where I do school," Lily said, with the logic of someone who had decided a thing and was informing you of the decision. Then she walked in. He stood on the sidewalk outside the school with his hands in his pockets and thought that his daughter was going to be fine in a way that had nothing to do with him. Victoria came to the open house. She sat in the small chair beside Mason, the kind of chair built for 7-year-olds, which did neither of them any favors, and looked at the drawings on the wall with genuine attention. And when Lily's teacher, a woman named Ms. Park, who had the specific exhausted warmth of someone who'd been doing this for 20 years and intended to keep going, said that Lily was doing well but had strong opinions about the order in which subjects should be taught, Victoria made a sound Mason interpreted as recognizing something familiar. "What?" he said, quiet, while Miss Park moved on to a parent across the room. "Nothing," Victoria said. She was looking at Lily's seat, the desk with the name card, the small pencil case organized exactly the way Lily organized everything, by color, strictly. She's going to run something someday. She's already running everything now, she just doesn't know it." "She knows it," Mason said. Victoria looked at him. "She gets it from you." "The organization definitely doesn't come from me. The certainty does." She turned back to the desk. "You're both very certain, in a way that doesn't look like arrogance. It looks like you've just decided some things are true, and you're not interested in debating them." He thought about that. "What things have I decided are true?" She didn't answer right away. The classroom sounds moved around them. Other parents talking, Ms. Park explaining something to a couple in the corner, a child's drawing of what might be a dog or possibly a bear rustling in the air from the vent. "That people are worth paying attention to," Victoria said. "That the work you do matters even when it's invisible. That your daughter is the priority, but that doesn't mean she gets to be your whole personality." She said it like she was reading from a list she'd kept for a while. "That if you say you're going to do something, you do it." He looked at her sideways. "Been thinking about this?" "I've been thinking about a lot of things." The Faro group meeting went well. Better than well. He walked in with his portfolio, his references, his plan for staffing and sequencing across 7 buildings, and he could tell within the first 20 minutes that Claire Dempsey had already made her decision, and the meeting was confirmation. They shook hands at the end of the table, and she said, "We'll have the contract to you by Friday." And he said, "I'll have it reviewed by Monday." And that was the beginning of the next chapter of his professional life, done in a conference room in Long Island City with a view of the water and a bad cup of coffee. He called Victoria from the parking lot. "Well?" she said. "Friday." She made a sound, short, bright, and then controlled it because that was Victoria. "I told you." "You did." "Send me the contract when you get it. I'll look it over." "I have a lawyer." "Send it to me anyway." Second set of eyes. He leaned against his truck. The September water was gray and cold-looking, and there were cranes on the far bank. "You know, you were right about something." "Frequently." "Which time?" "When you said the work matters, even when it's invisible." He looked at the cranes. "I used to think, it's a thing guys in this field think sometimes. You spend your life inside the walls, and nobody sees it. The lights work, the outlets work. The whole building functions, and nobody thanks the wire. They thank the architect, the designer, whoever did the surfaces. But the building stands because of what's in the walls." He paused. "That's always been enough for me. I just didn't know how to say it." "I know," she said. "I knew that about you before you did." October was when the good thing got complicated because good things always do at some point, and pretending otherwise is just vanity. It was a Sunday. Mason was working, not on the Faro project, which wasn't starting until January, but on a smaller residential job in Park Slope, A kitchen renovation where the homeowners had decided mid-project to add an island and hadn't understood what that meant for the circuit layout. He'd been there since 8. By noon, he was behind where he wanted to be, and his back was talking to him about the hour he'd spent in a crawl space. He texted Victoria that he'd be late for dinner, and she said no problem, and he went back to the crawl space. He got to her apartment at 7:30 instead of 6, which shouldn't have been a problem, except that when he knocked and she opened the door, there was someone standing in her living room he hadn't expected. Brandon Hayes. Mason stood in the doorway, looked at Brandon, looked at Victoria. He came by to... Victoria started. I wanted to talk to her, Brandon said. His tone was careful. Not hostile, but the careful of someone who was steering something. About the wedding, about what I found out. Mason stepped inside, closed the door. What did you find out? Brandon looked at him directly. That the marriage was fake, he said. That you went to the wedding as a favor, as a performance. He said the last word with a precision that suggested he'd been holding it for a while. The room was quiet. Mason looked at Victoria. She was standing near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. Not defensive, just contained. Her face was doing the careful thing, but underneath it was something else, something that wasn't calm at all. Brandon, she said, I told you. I know what you told me. I'm saying what I know. He turned from Mason back to her. Someone who was at the wedding. They knew you. They knew the timeline, and they told me. So I'm not speculating anymore. A pause. I'm not here to cause problems. I want you to know that. Then why are you here? Mason said. Brandon looked at him. Something in his expression was honest in a way that was almost painful. The honesty of someone who's been working at something for a while and has finally arrived at it. Because I think she deserves to know that someone actually wants to be here, he said. Not as a setup, not as a performance. And if what happened between us, if I'm part of why she needed someone to pretend. He stopped, redirected. I want to fix that, if it can be fixed. You're married, Victoria said. Her voice was flat. I know. 3 months ago. I know. Brandon's jaw moved. Delphine and I are... It's been difficult. I don't want to get into it. Then don't. Victoria to Brandon. Her voice went from flat to something harder. She stepped out from the kitchen doorway, which meant she was in the room now, fully. Look at me. He looked at her. You came here, she said, because you found out the wedding wasn't what you thought, and you've built a new story. The story where I was still damaged, still waiting, and the whole thing was an act, because that makes sense to you. It lets you stay the most important part of the narrative. She wasn't angry. This was worse than anger. This was just clear. It's not the story. You're saying what happened, he gestured between her and Mason, is real, she said. Yes. It started as a lot of real things start as something else. She held his gaze. That's not the part that matters. The part that matters is what it became. Brandon looked at Mason again. Mason stayed where he was, near the door, arms loose, watching. You turned it down, Brandon said. The Chicago job. I heard that too. You hear a lot, Mason said. People talk. You were offered the Meridian contract and you turned it down. He looked at Mason with something that wasn't quite respect but was adjacent to it. That was a real job. So is this, Mason said. Brandon was quiet for a moment. He looked around the apartment, at the books, the throw blanket on the couch, the corner where Mason's jacket was hanging on the hook like it lived there, which it did, because it had been there for 2 months, at the 2 coffee cups on the kitchen counter, the small evidence of a life that had arranged itself around 2 people. I came here because I thought... He stopped, tried again, looked at Victoria. I came here thinking you were in something that wasn't real, that you'd settled because that the way I left made you take the first thing that looked safe. His voice had changed, lower, stripped of the social varnish. And I can see that I was wrong. I've been wrong about what this is since the wedding. Yes, Victoria said. You have. He nodded slowly. The look on his face was the most unmanaged she'd ever seen from him, like something expensive that had finally broken down and the repair wasn't coming. She used to summarize herself, Mason said. Brandon looked at him. When she talked about her work, her plans, her company, she summarized, gave people the headline, because she'd learned it was what they wanted. He said it without accusation, just as a fact. She doesn't do that anymore. The room was quiet. I know, Brandon said, and the way he said it, not as an excuse, not as a deflection, just as something he'd lived with, was the most honest thing Mason had heard from him. I know I did that. He picked up his coat from the chair, looked at Victoria one more time. You should know, he said, that whatever happens with Delphine, I'm not coming back here. I'm telling you this is the last time. Not because I'm being noble, because I can see there's nothing to come back to. And I think I needed to see it clearly to stop looking. Victoria said nothing for a moment. Then, I hope you figure it out, Brandon. I mean that. He nodded, looked at Mason once more, a look between men that didn't need language. Then he left. The door closed. The apartment settled back into its own sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, a bus on the street below, the city going about its evening. Victoria stood in the middle of the room. You okay? Mason said. She turned. Her face was something he hadn't seen before. Not the carefully managed expression, not the close to laughing one, not the board meeting one. Something more tired and more open than any of those. Ask me again in a minute, she said. He crossed the room. She let him take her by both arms, and she leaned her forehead against his shoulder and breathed. The fake marriage was your idea, she said into his jacket. Technically. And it's been real for how long? Actually real in your head. He thought about it. The drive back from the Hamptons, he said. Probably. She made a sound, not quite a laugh. That was the first day. I know. She pulled back enough to look at him. You sat with that for months. I was waiting until you were ready to hear it. She looked at him for a long moment. I pushed you toward Chicago, she said. That night in the kitchen. I was telling myself I was being selfless, and I was just scared. I was building the justification to protect myself by calling it protecting you. I know. And you could see it and you didn't call it out. I called it out a little. You called it out exactly the right amount. She looked down. I almost let you go because I convinced myself that caring about you meant standing aside. That's backwards. That's completely backwards. It's not all backwards, he said. The impulse is right. You wanted good things for me. You just applied it wrong. The impulse is fear wearing a nice coat. Sometimes, he said. Sometimes it's both. She was quiet. He looked at the top of her head, the part in her hair, the way she held herself even when she was leaning on someone. Not collapsed, just resting. That was Victoria. She didn't collapse. She rested when she needed to and then stood up again. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I'm not saying it because you need to hear it. I'm saying it because it's just true. It's the truest thing I know right now. She looked up. Her eyes were bright but dry. I know, she said. I know it is. There is something nobody tells you about choosing someone. Not in the dramatic way, not in the crisis moment, but in the daily way. The ordinary choosing that happens again and again after the first one. The morning you're annoyed and you choose to say so cleanly instead of going quiet. The evening you're tired and you choose to stay anyway. The moment you realize that the person across from you has seen the worst version of your morning and still came back. That's the part that matters. Not the wedding, not the declaration. The Tuesday morning when nothing is at stake and you choose it anyway. Mason knew this, had always known it in a practical way, the way you know things you learned by living through them. He'd built a life for Lily on daily choosing, getting up, showing up, doing the thing that needed doing even when he'd rather not. He understood the architecture of it. What he hadn't expected was that it could feel like this. Not like maintenance, not like responsibility, but like something you wanted to wake up early for. He noticed it in small moments. The way he'd started keeping the good coffee at his apartment because she liked it, and he liked that she liked it. The way Lily had started saying we when she talked about the cafe. We went to the cafe, we had the banana bread, and neither of them had corrected her because she wasn't wrong. The way Victoria had stopped apologizing for calling him when something was wrong at the West Village build-out, and he'd stopped pretending he didn't want to be called. The West Village Cafe opened on a Friday in November. It was smaller than Birch and Grounds, which was intentional. Victoria had designed it for a different energy, quieter, more neighborhood, with a layout that created natural pockets of space where someone could sit for 2 hours and not feel watched. The lighting was what she'd described to Mason on that first drive to the Hamptons. Warm, but not amber, the specific temperature of being inside somewhere safe while it's cold outside. Mason had done the electrical. That hadn't been the plan. She had a contractor, but the contractor had made a decision about the under-counter lighting that was technically correct and practically wrong, and Mason had walked through 2 weeks before opening and looked at it and said, without framing it as a criticism, "That's going to feel like a grocery store when it's dim." She'd looked, she'd agreed. Her contractor had been professional about it, and Mason had spent 4 evenings after his own job fixing what could be fixed without pulling everything out, which was most of it. The opening was not a party. Victoria didn't do launch parties. She thought they set the wrong tone, created an energy that wasn't the energy the place was supposed to have. She did a soft open, invitation only, 40 people who were either in the industry or people she actually liked, which were not always the same group. She asked Mason to come. He brought Lily, who wore her good sneakers and treated the occasion with the appropriate weight. An hour in, Lily was sitting at the counter with a hot chocolate and explaining to a woman named Patricia, who ran the hospitality program at a culinary school, and had not asked for this conversation, why the chair she was sitting in was better than the chairs at Birch and Grounds. "The back is taller," Lily said, "so you can actually sit." Patricia looked at the chair, looked at Lily. "You're right," she said. "How old are you?" 7, Lily said. "I'm very observant." Mason stood near the back with a coffee, watching Victoria move through the room. She was working. You could always tell when she was working, the specific quality of her attention, the way she tracked multiple conversations while appearing fully in one. But she was also relaxed in a way that didn't often happen in professional contexts. Every so often, she'd look across the room at him. He'd hold it for a second and then look away, because some things didn't need to be performed. At one point, she peeled away from a conversation and came to stand beside him. "Well?" he said. She looked at the room. The 40 people filling the space, the sounds of it, the temperature of it, the way the light was sitting. "The lighting's right," she said. "Yeah, it is. I was right about the chairbacks." Lily just told Patricia from the Culinary Institute the same thing. Victoria looked at Lily at the counter. A small expression crossed her face. Private, unmanaged. "She's something else." "Yeah." "She asked me last week if I was going to be her stepmom," Victoria said. He turned to look at her. "She asked you directly." "She asked me directly while I was helping her with homework. She just dropped it in between math problems." Victoria looked at her coffee cup. "I told her I didn't know, that it was complicated." "What did she say?" "She said, 'It doesn't seem complicated, but okay.'" Victoria's mouth went crooked. "And then she went back to her math." He watched her face. "What would you have said if it wasn't complicated?" She looked at him steadily. The room moved around them, conversations overlapping, the espresso machine doing its thing, November cold pressing against the windows, and the warm light holding it off. "I would have said I'm working on it," she said, "which is different from no. I'm working on it." "That's enough," he said. "You're not going to push." "I'm not going to push." "Most people would push." "I know." He looked at the room. "I want you to want it, not feel obligated into it." She was quiet for a moment. "You know what the problem is with you?" "Probably several things." "You make it very hard to protect yourself from," she said. You're just consistently what you are. There's no gap between the version of you at the wedding and the version of you at 7 a.m. in a bad mood in a crawl space. You're the same person." "That's not always a compliment." "It's the best compliment." She said it simply, looking at the room rather than at him. "It's the thing Brandon never was. The thing I didn't know I was looking for because I'd never actually seen it." She paused. "My mother called last week. She asked how you were." "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were good." A beat. She asked if I was happy. I told her I was working on that too. He looked at her sideways. I'm doing better at it than I expected, she said. The working on it. Well, the Faro project started in January, and January was cold, and the site was brutal in the way of waterfront construction sites in winter. The wind off the water didn't negotiate, and the ground was half frozen, and by the end of most days, Mason couldn't feel his left ear. But the project was real, the scope was right, and his crew was good. 3 guys he'd worked with before, and 2 new ones who were solid. He ran a clean site. He was the guy who expected things done right the first time and was patient about teaching it, but not about carelessness. The crew understood this within the first week, and nobody pushed against it. He was home most nights by 7. Not always. Some nights the project required what it required, but most nights. Lily had dinner done by the time he got home, which she'd started doing 6 months ago, which mostly meant she'd reheated something Victoria had left on Monday or that Mrs. Okafor had sent over, but she presented it with authority regardless. He let her. Authority was worth practicing. Victoria's company expanded through that winter. The West Village location was doing what Birch and Grounds did, which was building a regular crowd quickly, the kind of place that people referred to by name when they told someone to meet them somewhere. She hired a manager for the West Village, so she wasn't running both herself, which freed up days she hadn't had in 3 years. She used some of that time on the hotel concept, which had moved from drawings to conversations with 2 investors she'd been cultivating for a year. She used some of it on other things. Lily's school play in March, which featured Lily this time as an actual speaking character, a narrator, which she performed with the focused intensity she brought to everything and which left Victoria applauding for longer than anyone else in the auditorium. She's going to be terrifying when she grows up, Victoria said in the car after. She's terrifying now, Mason said. Lily, in the back seat, allowed this. The conversation about what they were, the official version, the named version, happened the way most real conversations happen. Not at a moment designed for it, not with candles or a specific occasion, but on a Sunday morning in February when Mason was making eggs and Victoria was reading something on her laptop at his kitchen table, and Lily was drawing in the next room, and one of them said something ordinary, and something ordinary said back, and then he said, "I want to talk about something," and she looked up. "Okay," she said. He turned the burner down, turned around to face her. "Not a proposal," he said first, because he knew her, and he knew that word had weight she might not be ready for. "Not that, just, what are we doing?" She closed the laptop. "In what sense?" "In every sense. The sense where you have a drawer here and I have a key to your place, and Lily asks me about you when you're not around and you came to her school play. The sense where that drawer has been there for 6 months and neither of us has named what that means. We know what it means." "Yeah, but—" He found the word. "Lily asked you about being her stepmom, and you told her it was complicated, and I want you to know. It doesn't have to be, or it can be complicated and still happen. Both things can be true." Victoria was looking at him with her full attention, not guarded, just listening. "I'm not asking you to change everything overnight," he said. "I'm not asking you to sign anything or make announcements or anything that feels like pressure. I'm saying the drawer's not an accident. Lily's question isn't coming from nowhere. And I'm okay with slow if slow is what you need, but I need to know we're going somewhere." The kitchen was quiet, eggs sizzling softly, the city sounds outside. "I'm going somewhere," Victoria said. "I've been going somewhere since October, maybe since the Hamptons, if I'm being honest, which is embarrassing given that was supposed to be an arrangement." She looked at her hands. "I don't know how to do this part. I'm good at building things. I'm good at strategy, at looking at a space and seeing what it could be. I'm not good at—" She stopped. "Letting someone build something with you," he said. "Yes." She looked up. "But I'm trying. I want to try. That's all I'm asking." She stood up from the table, crossed to where he was standing by the stove, stood close to him, close enough that he could see the specific gray of her eyes, the way they went lighter in the morning light. "Mason. Yeah. I love you." She said it like she'd been carrying it for a while and had finally decided the carrying was more work than the saying. "I've been trying to find the right moment to say that, And I've been realizing there isn't a right moment. There's just now. He put his hands on her face, the way he had in her kitchen the night he told her about Chicago, except this time there was no question underneath it. I know, he said. I love you too. She made a sound that was almost exasperation. You knew. Not in those words, but yeah. How long? A while. He brushed his thumb against her jaw. I was waiting for you to get there. You could have said something. Some things need to arrive on their own. She looked at him for a long moment. I really thought I knew how to not fall for someone, she said. How'd that work out? Clearly not well. He kissed her. She put her hands on his chest and kissed him back, and behind them the eggs were going to burn if they didn't deal with them in the next 30 seconds. And from the next room, Lily called, Are you kissing? I can always tell by the silence. And they both laughed, forehead to forehead, and Mason reached behind him and turned the burner off. There is something worth saying about the people who stay, not the ones who arrive. Arriving is easy. Everybody does that. The ones who stay when the thing stops being new. When they've seen you angry and tired and wrong about something you were certain of. When they know the crack in your dashboard and the burned garlic and the specific way you shut people out when you're scared, and they're still there, coffee in hand, on a Tuesday, for no particular reason except that they want to be. Victoria spent most of her adult life building places where people felt at home, and she'd done it because home was the thing she'd grown up without and wanted to make real. She built it beautifully, thoughtfully, in warm light and tall chairbacks and dark roast, and the weight of the right things in the right places. She built it for other people and forgot to build it for herself. Or didn't forget. Knew she'd left a room empty, just didn't know how to let anyone furnish it. Mason walked in 14 months before any of this, because his truck's alternator light was on and he needed somewhere warm. He stayed because the coffee was good. He kept coming back because of something more than that. He brought his tools, fixed what was broken without being asked, listened to the whole version of things when people gave him the summarized one, and never once made her feel like she was taking up more space than she'd earned. That's not a love story in the traditional sense. There was no dramatic discovery scene, no running through airports, no rain-soaked reunion on a meaningful corner. There was a fake marriage that became real so gradually that by the time either of them would have put a name on it, it had already been true for months. There was a woman who thought protecting someone meant standing aside, and a man who understood the difference between stepping back and giving up, and the slow, imperfect work of two people learning to trust the thing they'd built. The flag didn't go up. No one announced it. It just became what it was. In May, 14 months from when he'd first walked into Birchen Grounds, 2 years to the month from when Victoria had opened it, the cafe on West 23rd got a renovation. Not a big one. The structure was right. Always had been. And Victoria wasn't someone who fixed things that worked. But the lighting in the back had needed updating for a year, and there was a section near the window she'd been thinking about differently, and Mason had a week between phases on the Faro project. He came in on a Monday morning when the cafe was closed and started pulling the old fixtures. Lily came with him. She'd been asking about electrical work with the systematic curiosity she applied to everything that interested her, and Mason had been answering her questions in real terms, not the simplified version, not the child version, the actual version, because she was 7 and she'd be annoyed later if she found out he'd been talking down to her. She sat on a stool near the window with a small notebook and wrote things down, which she'd been doing lately with everything. He didn't ask what she was writing. She'd tell him if it was important. Victoria came in around noon. She stood in the doorway and looked at what he'd done. The back section already finished, warm and even, the way she'd always wanted it, and she didn't say anything for a long moment. The back looks right, she said. It'll be better when the window section's done. Connects the whole room. She walked in, looked at Lily at the stool. What are you writing? Lily held up the notebook. Building notes, she said. I'm going to build something when I'm older. What kind of something? Lily considered. Something that needs to work right, she said, with the air of someone who had given this adequate thought. I don't know what yet. Victoria looked at her for a moment, then looked at Mason up on the ladder. She's going to be an engineer, she said. Or a CEO, he said. Not mutually exclusive, Victoria said. Lily wrote something in her notebook. By 4 o'clock, the work was done. Mason climbed down and stood in the middle of the cafe and looked at it. The light falling the way it was supposed to fall, the room reading the way a room should read when it's been thought about. Not perfect. The old chairs were still slightly uneven. The tiles near the register still had cracks in the grout he'd been meaning to fix. The hand-lettered sign in the window was a little more faded than last year. But it was right. In the way things are right when they've been built by people who meant it. Victoria came to stand beside him. Lily had moved to one of the tables and was drawing something. Probably a horse, always a horse. And the afternoon light came through the front window at the angle that made the cafe look like itself at its best. "I've been thinking," Victoria said. "About?" "The hotel project. The investors are close. I think we're close. If it goes, I'll need someone to oversee all the electrical installation. The whole thing, from ground up." She looked at the wall. "I know you're in the middle of Faro. Faro's 2 more years. After Faro." He looked at her. "You're asking me to work for you?" "With me," she said. "There's a difference." He thought about it. Not long. He thought about most things quickly once the information was in. "What does the hotel look like?" 40 rooms, West Chelsea, rooftop, the light in the lobby warm but not amber. "The elevator?" She looked at him. Confident. He nodded slowly. "Send me the plans when they're ready." "They won't be ready for a year. I'll still be here in a year." She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "I know you will." Outside, the May evening was doing its thing. The city settling into the specific key of a Friday afternoon, becoming a Friday evening, the light going golden on the buildings, people moving differently than they did at noon, slower, more decided about where they were going. Mason put his arm around her and she leaned into it, not dramatically, just the easy lean of someone who'd been doing this long enough that it didn't require thought. Lily looked up from her drawing, looked at them, looked back down. "I finished the horse," she said. "Let me see," Victoria said. Lily brought the drawing over. The horse was better than the one from before. The neck was right, the legs were mostly right, the mane was confident. She'd written something at the bottom in her block print handwriting. Birchen Grounds. Our place. Mason looked at it for a moment, then looked at Victoria. She was looking at the drawing with an expression that had nothing careful about it at all. "It's our best one yet," she said. Lily took the drawing back and put it in her notebook with the satisfaction of someone who'd made something true by making it. The cafe held its quiet. The light held its warmth. And all 3 of them stood in the place that had started as someone's dream of home and had slowly, without anyone planning it, become one. That's the part worth knowing about second chances. They don't usually come with announcements. They come in the side door while you're busy with something else. Your truck's alternator, your coffee order, the ordinary Tuesday you almost didn't show up for. They come dressed like ordinary days and you only know them for what they are later, looking back at the door you almost didn't open, at the stool you almost didn't sit down on, at the "I'm fine" you almost believed and almost let be the end of the story. The fake husband stopped being fake the same day he stopped being just a customer. And the lonely CEO found home in the last place she'd designed to hold everyone else's. It was imperfect. It was inconvenient. It was built from burned garlic and a cracked dashboard and a 6-year-old's uncompromising opinion about chairbacks. It was real. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in the end, the whole thing.